There is no such thing as a real relationship without conflict, especially when it comes to moms and daughters. Join us for that conversation today on Family Vision. Okay, welcome back, and Lissy and I are continuing our conversation on the mother-daughter relationship, and today we are talking about conflict. Not that we know anything about that at all.
So I think, just to start off, I've heard you say this a lot, obviously, when you grow up with a mom who's a therapist. You hear a lot of mantras said throughout the home. But one phrase that you said during a lot when we were kids was, there's no such thing as a conflict-free relationship. There's no such thing. And so as a high school teacher, a word that I hear a lot amongst my students and amongst kids is this word toxic. And I think toxic is a word that is so overused in our modern day culture, because you hear it all the time, like, oh, that person is so toxic, or they're so problematic, or I just can't be in a relationship with them anymore. And the solution for quote unquote toxic people is, well, you just cut them off. Mm-hmm. They're toxic to you. So that relationship, say goodbye. And really, I think that's just an indicator of a much broader problem that we have in our society, that we're really living in a generation of people that have no idea how to have conflict. And when conflict is present, their immediate response is, well, I just need to cut that person off. Right. And really, many people have no idea how to work through conflict in a healthy way, and what that looks like in a relationship.
And in reality, it's in these very close relationships, the mother-daughter relationship, that we learn the skills to deal with conflict. In fact, I talk a lot about this in my book, Not So Perfect Mom, which is going to be coming out on audio, I'm excited to announce. Mm-hmm. But that is sort of one of the main sections is, we have to realize that really good relationships are messy relationships that have plenty of conflict, but we work through them and we learn how to deal with, very difficult emotions like anger and disappointment and discouragement, because these are essential skills. And it's in this mother-daughter relationship that the Lord, uses this relationship, right, to teach us how to deal with these things for our future relationships. And can you remember when you were little, I would even say those things to you? Can you tell those stories about just that? I remember saying things like, okay, I know you're really angry, for example, with RW now, but we need to learn to deal with our anger, because guess what? You're going to be really angry with your future husband someday. And so if you can learn to deal with your anger with your older brother right now, you're going to be heads up when you're going to have like better skills to deal with that anger that you're going to have in a future relationship, a future boyfriend, future husband.
And it's always kind of funny. I'm sure you can relate to this even if in your marriage with dad. But, when we were in conflict growing up, I would hear things that you said to me that used to just drive me crazy. And I thought you were being so like, I'm not actually that way. Oh, you're saying I'm self-absorbed. Oh, you're saying I'm this. I'm not that way. And I thought you were crazy. And then lo and behold, I got married. And I'm hearing the exact same things from my husband. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's...
Wait,
maybe there's something to this.
Right, absolutely. So really, the relational problems that we see in the mother and daughter relationship often spring up, right, in the junior high and high school years. Because we homeschooled, I always like to say that was like this massive crucible that we were kind of dealing with conflict pretty early, right? Like in the early years. But I had some hope because I realized that it was sort of, we were spending so much time together that most mother and daughters weren't spending time with. So therefore, we had a lot more opportunities for conflict, and then a lot more opportunities to deal with the conflict and learn about resolution. So often, while the conflict may surprise a lot of us in the mother-daughter relationship, that it's coming, can feel like it's coming out of nowhere in the junior high or high school years. But I have really found that a lot of that is that it's been brewing often in those early years, and it's more like it's just sprouting. And there are things that often have been under the surface and issues that needed to be dealt with, and now they're just coming to fruition. It in many ways it shouldn't surprise us, but it often does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a huge just a point that we would want to talk about is that resolving conflict, it's always going to require humility. And I mean, and again, and if we're
Yes.
talking about things that are currently lacking in our modern society, you know, it's really hard to be truly humble, to take ownership of something that you did wrong. And I think that was one of the best things that you and Dad did when we were kids, is being willing to say, you know, I was wrong. I'm sorry. And setting an example for that, because I think we can easily talk about people from even older generations who would say, you know, I've never heard my parents apologize for anything, or I've never heard them say I'm sorry. And so how you and Dad modeled that for us as kids in conflict, and how oftentimes just saying those words, I was wrong, can immediately, right? If
Yes,
you're on
right,
the receiving
right.
end of that, your walls immediately go down.
Correct.
And another thing that Dad always talked about that I think is so important, and I use this basically every day, is, you know, when you're apologizing for something, your sentence should always start with I.
Mm-hmm.
I did this. I was rude to you. Instead of, I'm sorry if you felt like,
Yes, right.
I'm sorry if what I did offended you, right?
Right,
So
right.
always taking the responsibility, and I think you and Dad did a great job of modeling that for us, and then in turn helping us do that in return.
Yeah, it's hard when we're talking about the mother-daughter relationship. I think I remember doing this in the seminar, talking about, you know, you're saying how I did a good job modeling that, but there were plenty of times that I can remember coming in and saying, you know, Lissy, I'm sorry, I was wrong, you know, and apologize, and then you just kind of looking back at me and saying thank you, and in my head I'm thinking, it's a really good time for you now to apologize and say you were wrong. And I would say, maybe, I don't even know how to give myself a percentage on that. Was it maybe 75, 80, maybe 75% of the time I was able to walk away and not say what was in my head, which was, but there was probably a good 25% I would say, okay, Lissy, now's the time for you to say, I'm sorry, and I was wrong for this. You know, I'm waiting for it to come back. But when we're dealing with conflict, it's really also important to be humble enough to receive help. And I have a lot of funny stories on receiving help, and one really stands out to me. Well, funny now, not funny when it happened. Not funny at all when it happened. And one of these stories is I can distinctly remember I had all of you kids at Klein Creek Farm. We were doing this, you know, fun family field trip for the day, and Klein Creek Farm is just down the street from where your dad was working at Bible Church, and you and I are just having a really bad day, and we're having lots of conflict, and I'm getting to the point where I cannot take it anymore, and I don't even know what to do, and it's just been like thing upon thing, you know, one incident, another incident. So I call Dad, and I'm like, I need your help. I need you to come down here. I cannot do this anymore. And that was always a big step for me, because when he came into the picture, it was literally like the principal coming. And I can remember to this day being at a picnic table at Klein Creek Farm, where Dad is sitting on one side of the picnic table and Lissy and I are on the other side. And, you know, and RW's got the other kids somewhere else. And he's basically mediating between the two of us, you know, and I have to humble myself as mom to get his input, because the reality is, you know, often, as you already said, you know, the things that you heard me say to you, you've heard come back to you. Well, I was experiencing that ever since you were about 2 or 3 years old. I would be saying things to you, and I'd be like, okay, that so reminds me of things that my mom said to me. Or wait, didn't Rob just say that to me? And I used to joke with my friends. I'm like, you know, Lissy's name means grace, and she's teaching me about grace, but this is what I'm learning. Apparently having a relationship with myself is rather difficult. You know what I mean? It really was a phase, and I had to be humble enough to get help when we were in the midst of conflict, because Dad would sometimes have to be that voice of reason, intervene between the two of us so I could see what part I was playing. I couldn't always see it that well, and I think you just said it perfectly. Humility has to be a part of resolving conflict, and both on the parent and then teaching it to our children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing, just going off of that, is expecting there to be seasons of conflict. Right. So if you're in a season that feels hard, your first reaction shouldn't be, well, we just have a bad relationship. or, there's just something wrong here. Well, really, if we expect these seasons of conflict, it can sometimes be an indicator of a really strong relationship working through
Right.
these things together. And again, just setting expectations for what this mother-daughter relationship kind of has in store. If we expect things to constantly feel warm and fuzzy and buddy and trips to Starbucks all the time, woohoo, it's probably not going to be that way all the time, right? There's seasons of difficulty, and if our expectation is the warm fuzzies at every moment, it's going to be really easy to be discouraged in that. And I think another thing, and I think you'll talk about this in a second, but really just expressing to love and commitment to one another, even in seasons of conflict. And I think when we talk about this relationship and how pivotal and important that it is, like we've talked about in previous episodes, I think that the first time that it really sunk into me, that love and commitment piece of our relationship, was when I had my daughter for the first time. And I remember in those weeks coming home from the hospital, taking care of a newborn, I think we were on the phone probably like 5 times a day. I calling her. I was like, Mom, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? Or sometimes just calling to talk and just needing someone to be there with me. And I remember turning to my husband at one point and saying to him, like, Bond, how do people do this without their moms? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Like, what a difficult thing that would be to walk through something like having a new baby and not having your mom. And I also realized as I was looking at my daughter in those first couple of weeks, and the overwhelming love and commitment that you feel towards your new baby, for the first time it sort of hit me. I was like, wow, like that is how my mom feels about me. And that commitment that never goes away as a parent, and I think you can't realize that level of love and commitment until you're a parent, is so important to stress in these times of conflict, because as much as you might feel it as a parent, saying those words to your child in these difficult seasons can really make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And you've heard me say it many times, and I really just thank the Holy Spirit that he gave me these words, because I had no plan of communicating like this, but I can still remember being in your bedroom in high school and things being really difficult. Like, we were in one of those really bad seasons, and I just looked at you to say, Lissy, I know you don't like me very much right now, and to be honest, I don't like you very much right now, but I am committed to you. I'm never going away, and I would take a bullet for you. And I said that because it's 100% true. And I would say that's 100% true for most parents. So, if the car's coming, they're going to push, the kid out of the way because that's how God designed the system to work, right? Like the parents love their kids in a way that a child can never love the parent back the exact same way. And I just want to equate that simply to the love of our Heavenly Father. He loves us in a way that we can never love him back the same way. And it's through this process of family and parenting that we begin to understand that. But just drilling a little bit deeper into this concept of conflict before, as we wrap up this conversation, I do think it's important as moms to look at this issue of control and how that plays into conflict. Because I think if we think about a lot of those battles and the things that cause problems, especially in those older years, revolved around, control issues, because we're trying to navigate you getting older, making your own choices and having your own responsibility. And as a mom, you're trying to balance, okay, what parts am I supposed to let her make decisions on, and what parts am I supposed to let go now, and what parts do I need to hold the line and maintain some of that control. And I just want to say to moms out there, those are really good conversations to have with your daughter in those high school years, and directly face into that. Are you feeling like, are there areas where you feel like I'm over controlling, and have those conversations? You may not come to an agreement, but have the conversation. I had one example that just kind of struck me as funny, that a friend of mine was saying that when she was in high school, her mom just required that she was not allowed to leave the house with wet hair. Like, that was a huge issue. She could not leave the house with wet hair. To me, that's an example of, okay, well, maybe that's an area where, are we being a little over controlling? Is it okay for a 13-year-old to decide, can I have wet hair when I leave the house? I know that we can laugh about that, but in reality, it's those kind of things, right? That you can end up having I can think of dresses and bathing suits and a lot of things where you had to accept the line that I was giving you, specifically when it comes to swimwear. I mean, we were a no bikini family. We still are. And that was an issue, right? Where it's like, okay, everybody else, mom, is doing something else. And I had to figure out where I needed to give you the proper level of control in those boundaries. I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Absolutely. I think finding that balance of giving privilege, but matching privilege with responsibility. So you can't give so many privileges without giving enough responsibility, but you also can't give too much responsibility without giving enough privilege.
Right.
So you kind of have to find that balance, and it's probably going to be ever changing as the years go by. How are we balancing privilege and responsibility, and not falling to one side or the other too much.
Yeah, and adjusting your expectations. I know for me, a lot of that was, when you were getting, you were very responsible, I would say, especially in the younger high school years. But as she was getting into more stressors, right? You had more things on her plate as she's thinking about more adults. Responsibilities and decisions. I then also had to give you some freedom. Like, okay, she couldn't get these responsibilities done, just like any adult has this kind of, we can't expect perfect growth or that it's going to be perfectly correlated all the time. There is a balance, and I love how you said that. But the most important thing is realizing that conflict is a part of it, and we're teaching important skills as we learn to navigate through that. Can you close us up, Lissy, by really talking about weighing the relationship costs? I think that's an important thing.
So this is kind of the last thing we'll touch on, but we have this idea, and honestly, it's something that my dad says frequently in our home, but how can you weigh the relational cost of conflict? And sometimes you have to let things go because the relationship is worth more than whatever it is that you're upset about.
Right.
Other times, you have to talk through things. Like, in order to preserve the relationship, we have to sort some of these things out. But I think even in our relationship right now, I think a couple weeks ago we were talking about this of, sometimes it's not worth the relational cost to bring some things up. And so really what it comes down to is, at the end of the day, what we value is our relationship. That's what we want to preserve. That's what we want to build. That's what we want to grow. And so if we're keeping that at the center of our conflict, and maybe that's taking a break when maybe hurtful words are about to be said, maybe it's getting someone else to step in, maybe it's, whatever that might be, to whatever can preserve that relationship. Because, I remember times in high school when oftentimes it's words that are spoken in the heat of whatever conflict that it is that takes such a toll on the relationship that it's really just not worth it.
Right.
And so preserving that, and even giving a consequence, is sometimes better than, I don't want to say sometimes, oftentimes giving a consequence is better than an angry lecture, and it preserves the relationship more than whatever words might come out in that dialogue.
And I know we're going a little long, but it does remind me when you looked me in the face in high school and said to me, Mom, I would rather have a consequence than you to talk to me in a shaming way. I think that, the more times I would get triggered, it'd be easy for me to get into a shaming tone and a degrading tone and say things, even maybe the words weren't necessarily bad, but even just the way I was saying them was very hurtful. And when you looked me in the eye and said that to me, it really got my attention. Like, okay, I need to learn to deliver the consequence, follow through on the consequence, but, step back and not cast with this shaming tone, which is is doing much more damage to our relationship. And teenagers still need consequences. And it was such a good reminder, and actually your maturity that you were able to say that to me. It still reminds me how important it is as a mom of teenagers to not stop giving consequences when you need to give the consequences. Yeah. Well, we have gone a little bit longer today, but this is such an important topic. And I want you, Lissy, again, to talk about your resources in case someone's joining us for the first time, because they're so important and so helpful.
Absolutely. So Living for Christ at Home, this is a free devotional that's actually on our website. This was written, really the heart behind this is helping teenagers live for Christ in one of the hardest places to be a Christian, which is at home and with your family and with your parents and with your siblings. Right. And so really honing in on this idea that who you are at home is who you really are. And so if that's the real us that's coming out with our families, well, then I don't know about everyone else, but at least for me, I really need growth and the Lord's help in that area. So that's Living for Christ at Home. Another resource that we have, I wrote this during my freshman year of college. It's called The Heart of Your Teen. And this is a book that's actually written for parents from the perspective of teenagers, and really encouraging parents to never stop pursuing the heart of their teenager. Amen. And how to build lifelong, heart-connected relationships with them.
Amen. Lissy, it has been such a joy to have you on our podcast for these 3 sessions. I mean, I love doing this with you. It is just really fun for me as your mom. So thank you for taking the time to do this, and thank you for joining us again. We appreciate it. And if you have comments or prayer requests, please reach out to us at podcast@visionaryfam.com. And again, thank you for joining us for these important conversations on family vision.